The night Calder's patrol came back. It was already past the second bell and the snow had turned to ice. I heard the gate horns from the eastern tower. 2 short blasts and a long one, wounded multiple, come now, and I was already moving before the echo died. The great doors of Greyhold swung open on the courtyard, and the cold hit like a wall. 8 men had ridden out 3 days ago. 6 came back. The 2 who came back on foot were carrying the third between them, his leg open from hip to knee, the linen they'd bound it with long since soaked through. The horses were lathered and shaking. And behind the last rider, tied across a saddle because they could not walk, were 2 of our wolves, Bren and Calla, the bonded pair that had run with Calder's unit for 4 years. Bren's side was dark with blood. Calla was making no sound at all, which was worse. "Healers," I said to my steward Osric, who had appeared at my shoulder. "All of them now." He was back in 4 minutes. He did not meet my eyes when he returned, which told me everything before he spoke. "Master Edwin says the storm will bring Icelung to anyone who works outside in it tonight. He says the men should be brought to the inner hall and the wolves—" Osric stopped. "The wolves what?" "He says the wolves are too far gone, that the prudent course is to let them go easy before morning and not risk the healers on what cannot be saved." I looked at him for a long moment. I did not raise my voice. I had learned a long time ago that raising my voice was a luxury I could not afford, because when I did, walls cracked. "Tell Master Edwin," I said, "that I will speak with him tomorrow about what prudence means in the service of this pack." I turned back to the courtyard. Calder was still mounted, which told me he was holding himself together by will alone. There was a cut above his eye, and he was listing slightly left. My second, Joran, was organizing the men through the side gate into the inner hall where we could work by firelight. The 2 dead were being lifted down with the quietness we reserve for that specific grief. I was watching Bren try to rise and fail, the snow around him going dark, when I heard the creak of the guest wing door. She came out without a cloak. She had a satchel over one shoulder, worn brown leather, and she was pulling on a pair of thick-knit gloves as she walked. She crossed the courtyard at a pace that was not running. It was something more economical than running, a healer's walk, like she had decided before she reached the door that she knew what she would find and she was not going to waste breath on anything except the work. She went to Calla first, which told me she had assessed from the doorway and made a choice. She knelt in the snow without hesitation. She opened the satchel. Joran was already coming toward her with his hand up. "The guest quarters are in the west wing. You should." "I know where the guest quarters are," she said without looking up from Calla. "I've been in them since yesterday." "Move your hand, please. You're blocking my light." He looked at me. I nodded once. He stepped back. I did not know her name then. She had arrived the previous morning, a healer traveling the northern road who had requested shelter from the coming weather. Osric had placed her in the outer guest rooms as we did with those who carried legitimate healers' papers and posed no threat. She had paid in silver, eaten in the common hall without incident, and by all accounts spoken to no one. Her papers listed her bloodline as Saren of the House Carath. I had seen the name and recognized it the way you recognize a name that has been used as a warning. The Carath healers had been stripped of their standing in Varath's Healers' Council 12 years ago, the details of which I had inherited rather than witnessed, and which I had never looked into closely because it had not seemed to require my attention. Standing in the snow watching her work, I thought, I should have looked into it. She had Calla's wound open and was cleaning it by the light of a lantern she had hooked to the saddle post. Her hands moved with a precision that was not hurried and not slow, the precision of someone who has done this enough times that the hands know the sequence without being told. She was talking to Calla in a low, continuous voice, not words exactly, more like a sound that meant I am here. I am not leaving, hold on, and I watched Calla, who had been still with the specific stillness of an animal that has given up, turn her head slowly toward the sound. Bren let out a breath that was almost a word. I crossed the courtyard. I crouched down near Bren, put my hand on his flank, felt the shudder of his breathing. He was colder than he should have been. I looked at the wound, deep, a blade wound, the kind made by something long and deliberate. It had been bound in the field but not well, and the cold had done the rest. "Can you get to him after her?" I asked. She did not look up. "I'm already thinking about him." "The femoral is intact on this one," she meant Calla, so she has time. "He doesn't. I'll need 2 minutes here and then you'll have to hold him still while I work." "I can hold him." "I know," she said. She still hadn't looked at me. I stayed where I was. Joran came and stood beside me. He was quiet for a moment, watching her work. Then, low enough that only I could hear, "She's not one of our healers." "No, she's a Karath." "I know." "Aldrich," he said my name the way he had been saying it for 15 years, since we were young soldiers together, and he was the only one permitted to say it plain. "Edwin isn't going to like this." "Edwin," I said, "is indoors." Joran said nothing more. She finished with Calla in just under 3 minutes, bound the wound with something from the satchel that smelled of pine resin and something sharper I didn't have a name for, and then she moved to Bren. She looked at me. For the first time, I had her eyes gray, clear, entirely unfrightened. The courtyard was lit only by the lantern and the spill from the inner hall windows, and snow was coming in sideways now, and she was kneeling in it with bare knees because she had gone down fast and her skirt had soaked through. And she looked at me with the expression of someone who has simply accounted for all of that and decided it is not the thing that matters. "His left side," she said. "Put both hands flat here and here, don't let him roll. If he rolls, we'll lose what I've already." "I understand," I said. I put my hands where she showed me. Bren flinched and then steadied. She worked, I held. I have held a great many things in my life. I have held a kingdom together through 2 succession challenges and a famine year. I have held men as they died, because that is the thing a king does when there is no one else, and the men deserve to not die alone. I held my wife Myra's hand through the 3 days she fought the fever, and I held the silence after, because the silence was the only thing left to hold. I had not thought about any of that in I didn't know how long. I had learned not to think about it, which is different from healing, but it served the same function if you kept moving. I was thinking about it now, for reasons I did not examine. She worked on Bren for 11 minutes. I know because I counted, not because I was impatient. She wasn't losing him. She was winning him back by steady degrees, and I counted because it gave my mind something to do that wasn't the thing it was trying to do, which was think about Myra, and why this woman kneeling in the snow reminded me of her when they were nothing alike. Myra had been loud and bright and laughed at things no one else laughed at. This woman made no noise except the low, continuous murmur to the wolves, and she had the quality of a deep-running current, not still, but entirely self-possessed. When she sat back on her heels, Bren was breathing more slowly. The bleeding had stopped. "He'll need to be inside," she said. "Warm, not hot, and I'll need to check the wound at first light. Don't let anyone give him anything to eat until I've seen him." "You'll have everything you need," I said. She began to close the satchel. Her hands were red with cold and something else. She didn't look at them. "The men," she said. "Inside. I should see them. You've been in the snow for," I checked, "almost an hour." "I know," she stood. She was taller than I had expected, or perhaps it was just the straightness she carried. "The leg wound is the urgent one. The others I can see in order, if you can have someone bring hot water to wherever you put them." "Come inside," I said. "Please." She looked at me then, properly, the way she had not done since she'd walked out of the guest wing door. It was a direct look, no performance in it, no deference and no challenge. She was simply looking at the person she was speaking to, accounting for him the way she had accounted for the snow and the cold and the insufficient light. "Aldrich of Vareth," she said, not a question. "Yes." She nodded once as if confirming something she had already worked out. "Your wolves are going to be all right," she said. "Calla will need a week of rest and no running. Bren will need longer, but they're going to be all right." Something moved in my chest that I had no name for, which frightened me slightly, which I did not show. "Thank you," I said. She nodded again and walked past me toward the inner hall. I did not sleep that night. This was not unusual. I slept poorly as a rule, and on nights when men had come back broken, I did not sleep at all. I went to my study and I worked, which was the other thing I had learned to do with the space where sleep should be. But that night I found myself leaving the study twice to walk past the inner hall where she was working, and both times I told myself I was checking on my men, which was true in the way that incomplete things are true. The first time I passed, she was with Calder, who was sitting up on a low bench with his shirt off, and she was closing the cut on his ribs with the focus of someone finishing an argument. He was talking. Calder always talked. It was one of his qualities, the way some people fill a room with furniture and some fill it with sound. And she was listening in the way that meant she was not listening, which is not rudeness in a healer but simply a kind of double attention, one track on the words and one track entirely on the work. The second time, she was alone with the fire. The men had been settled. She was seated on a low stool near the hearth, her satchel open in her lap, reordering things inside it with the quiet methodicalness of someone taking inventory. She had her hair loose. I hadn't noticed earlier because it had been bound back, and the firelight did something with it that I also did not notice in the sense of consciously registering, and then firmly walking away from. She looked up when I stopped in the doorway. "They're sleeping," she said. Good, I came in. I did not have a particular reason to come in. The room was warm and my study was cold, and I was done pretending those were not related facts. "Can I get you something? Food, more water." "I ate," she said. "Joran brought something. He's very efficient, your second." "He is." She returned to the satchel. I stood near the fire, and for a moment there was only the sound of the burning and the distant sound of the wind outside the walls. It was the kind of silence that a man with more social grace than I possess would have known how to fill. I was not known for social grace. "You're from the South," I said. It was not particularly incisive, but it was true. The southern vowels were there if you listened. "Caldris originally," she didn't look up. "I've been traveling for about 3 years. Since the council stripped your houses standing." She was quiet for a moment. Not hurt quiet or defensive quiet, more the quiet of someone deciding whether the question deserves the honest answer or the short one. "Since 2 years after that, actually. I stayed for the first year. I thought it might be addressed. It wasn't, and eventually I thought, this is not a place that will let me work, and the work is the point. So I left." "What was the grounds?" I said. "For the stripping, I'll be honest with you, I inherited the record of it and I never examined it closely." She looked up at me then. The gray eyes had something in them that might have been surprise, not offense. Just the mild surprise of a person who has prepared for a conversation to go one direction and found it going another. "My mother," she said. "She was the senior healer of Karath. She treated a man the council had condemned for treason. She treated him because he was sick and he came to her, and she was a healer. And in her understanding, which she had held her whole life and which I hold, that is what you do. You treat whoever comes. You do not ask what the council has decided about them first." The council disagreed. They called it a betrayal of Vareth's interests. They stripped her standing and the houses with it. A small pause. "She died 4 years later. She didn't stop working. She just worked without the title and without the council's protection, and it was harder, and she got sick more often, and eventually," she stopped. "I'm sorry, you asked a short question." "I didn't ask a short question," I said. "I asked the right one." She looked at the fire. "She was the best healer I have ever known," she said. "And she died with a disgraced name, and the council has never addressed it, and I travel because the road does not ask me what my house's standing is before it lets me work." I was quiet for a long time. "I looked at your papers yesterday," I said, "when Osric brought them. I saw the name Karath and I registered that it was a name with a difficulty attached to it, and I moved to the next thing on my list." She didn't say anything. "I'm telling you that," I said, "because I want you to know that I'm aware it's inadequate. I'm the king of Vareth. The standing of your house is a Vareth matter. That I did not look into it is," I stopped. "Inadequate." "You have a great many things on your list," she said. She said it without irony, which would have made it easier to dismiss. "Yes," I said, "I do. That's not an excuse." She was looking at me again. I was aware that I was not behaving like a king in the way that most people expected kings to behave, which is with the comfortable distance of authority. I was not comfortable at the moment. I was not entirely sure what I was. "Saren," she said. "I'm sorry. My name, you've been avoiding using it, I think because you're not sure whether to, and I'd rather you used it than called me you, or the healer, or nothing." "Saren," I said. Something occurred in the silence after that word that I will spend a long time trying to describe and probably failing. It was not a sound, and it was not an event. It was more like the absence of something that had been there for 3 years, something like the constant low sound of a bell that you stop hearing because it never stops, and then it stops, and the silence is so complete you feel it in your teeth. My wolf, who had not spoken to me, not stirred, not made himself known in any way I could point to since the 43rd day after Myra died, when he had simply gone somewhere I could not follow, moved. Not surged, not howled. Moved the way a creature moves when it has been sleeping in the dark for a long time and something warm passes close enough to feel. I stood very still. She was watching me with the careful attention of a healer watching a patient who has just done something unexpected. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It was technically true. I should let you rest." "I'm fine." "You've been working for?" I checked the window. The sky was still dark, but the darkness had changed quality. 5 hours. "Healers work longer." "Not in my hall tonight," I said. "The room you had is yours for as long as you want it. I'll have Osric bring more firewood. Bren and Calla are in the inner stable, warm, separated from the others so they're not disturbed. I'll have someone sit with them through the night." She looked at me for a long moment. "You don't have to." "I want to," I said. "Sleep, Saren, I'll see you at first light." I left before she could answer, because there was a particular kind of conversation that if you let it continue you will say things you have not yet organized into words, and I was not ready for that. I went to the eastern parapet instead and stood in the cold until I felt like myself again, which took some time, because I was not entirely sure anymore what myself was. In the morning she checked Bren and Calla and then the 3 men who had been wounded, and she did all of this with the same quality she had carried through the night, which was a complete absence of performance. She did not make anything of what she was doing. She simply did it. Calder, who had a gift for reading people, and had survived 15 years of my service partly on the strength of it, watched her from his bench with an expression I recognized, because it was the expression he got when he was recalibrating, when what he had assumed about something turned out to be wrong and he was quietly replacing it. I remained in the doorway through most of this, which Joran noticed and said nothing about, because Joran had also survived 15 years of my service, partly on the strength of knowing when to say nothing. When she was done, she came to find me in my study. She knocked once and came in without waiting, which told me she had already decided that whatever we were to each other, it was not the kind of thing that requires performance at the door. She sat in the chair across from my table without being invited, because it was clearly the chair for sitting in, and she folded her hands in her lap and looked at me. "Bren's wound is clean," she said. "No infection, he'll be lame for a few weeks, but he'll run again. Calla is better than I expected this morning. She's a strong animal, and that bond she carries with Bren is doing half the work. She wants to be near him. If you can move them into the same space later today, she'll heal faster." "Done," I said. "Your man with the leg, Pell, I think Joran called him. The wound is clean and the bone is intact, but the muscle damage is significant. He'll walk. I can't promise he'll run the way he used to." "He'll still be valued in this pack," I said. "I'll speak to him about it myself." She nodded. There was a pause, and I felt her deciding something. "I should move on today," she said. "The storm has passed. The road will be difficult for another day or two, but passable. I was only meant to stay one night." I put down the document I was holding. "I'd like you to stay," I said. She was quiet. "Bren and Calla will need checking at least twice more this week. Pell will need regular care for the next several days. And I stopped. She waited. She was good at waiting, not pressuring, just leaving space the way a patient person leaves space, in case something that needs to be said can find its way out. "I would like to revisit the matter of your house's standing," I said. "Formally. I should have done it before. I'd like to begin now, and I would prefer you to be here while it's being reviewed so that I don't make decisions about your family's name without your presence." Something moved in her face that she then held still. You don't have to do that," she said. "It's been 12 years. I've made a kind of peace with the road." "I know I don't have to," I said. "I want to. Those are not the same thing." A pause. "I know the difference," she said. "My mother used to say that." I held that. "Will you stay?" I said. She looked at the window. The morning light was coming in clean and cold after the storm, the kind of light that makes everything look newly made. I watched her think, not trying to direct the thinking, just letting it happen. "A week," she said. "I'll stay a week for Bren and Calla and for Pell." "Thank you," I said. "And you can look into the records," she said, as if she was adding it on, as if it was less important than it was. "If you find grounds. I'm not asking you to simply restore the name. I'm not interested in a correction that isn't founded. If you look and you find grounds, I want to know." "That is exactly how I intend to proceed," I said. She stood, she looked at me again, that accounting look, direct and clear. "You're not what I expected," she said. I've spent 3 years on the road, and most of the time when I tell people my family's name, the conversation ends. I'm the one who should have ended it 12 years ago by looking more closely, I said. I'm trying to start it now. She left. I sat at my table for a long time after, looking at the morning light on the stone, aware of my wolf the way you're aware of warmth after a long cold. Not something remarkable, just present, impossible to ignore. She stayed 7 days. I will not pretend the week was simple. There is nothing simple about a man who has been locked in his own grief for 3 years, suddenly finding that the lock has something wrong with it. That where he was sure there was only solid iron there is a small, inconvenient amount of light. I did not declare anything to myself. I have never been a man who finds declarations useful in private. Declarations are for public matters, for the hall, for the moments when clarity is owed to the people who follow you. In private, I find it more useful to simply watch what is true and let it be true without rushing to name it. What was true? I went to the inner stable every morning, officially to see Bren and Calla. She was always there first. We talked about the wolves, and then about the road, and then about whatever she had noticed. She noticed things, quietly and without making a production of it, the way water finds its level. She noticed that the healer's stores in Greyhold's East Wing were badly organized and said so, not critically but accurately, and was clearly not expecting me to do anything about it. So I found myself asking her to reorganize them, which she did over the course of 2 afternoons, and which Osric watched with an expression he did not quite manage to contain. I found the council records on the Karath matter on the 3rd day. It took me longer than it should have, because the records were not organized the way I would have organized them, and also because the truth of what I found there made me sit very still for a while, which is not a productive use of time but is sometimes unavoidable. The record of the stripping was exactly as she had said. Her mother had treated a condemned man. The man in question had been condemned on testimony that had later, 6 years later, buried in a separate file, been found to be false. A quiet notation in a clerk's hand, never acted upon. The condemnation had been quietly set aside. The Karath name had not been restored. No one had connected the files. I had them connected that afternoon. I had Osric draw up the formal review documents by evening. On the 4th day, Calla walked across the stable on her own for the first time since the ambush. She went directly to Bren and lay down against his flank, and he put his chin on her neck, and I watched Saren watch them with an expression she wasn't guarding, which was a look of such uncomplicated tenderness that I had to look away. On the 5th day, it snowed again, a gentler snow, the kind that falls slowly and makes everything quiet, and I found her in the western passage, watching it through the arrow-slit window. She heard me coming and didn't turn around. I grew up near the mountains, she said when I stopped beside her. We had this in winter. My mother used to say that snow makes everything honest. All the tracks show up, you can't pretend you didn't go where you went. She sounds like someone I would have liked, I said. She would have had opinions about you, Saren said. She had opinions about everyone. She wasn't unkind. She just thought clearly and said what she thought. A pause. I think she would have decided you were a man who carries more than he should alone. She noticed things like that. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow fell. She would have been right, I said. Saren turned to look at me. She had been doing this more over the course of the week, turning to look at me, not searching for anything, just looking, the way she looked at Bren to check his progress, accountingly and without judgment. Osric told me about your wife, she said. Not specifically. He just mentioned that you'd had a loss 3 years ago and that things had been difficult since. I wanted you to know I knew in case it's useful. I won't say anything more about it unless you want to. I stood for a long time watching the snow. Her name was Myra, I said. She was, I stopped. I had not said her name aloud in a very long time, which I had not realized until I heard it in my own voice. She was a great deal more than I was in most of the ways that count, and then she was gone and I had a kingdom to run, so I ran it. I stopped again. That's probably not very interesting. It's very interesting, Saren said. She said it simply, not the way people say it when they are being polite. What was she like? And somehow, standing in the western passage in the 5th day snow, I told her. I told her about Myra's laugh, which had arrived before she did always, and which I had heard from 3 halls away and known her by after a while. I told her about the way Myra had argued with my counsel and generally won, not because she was louder, but because she was usually right and had a gift for making the right answer feel like the council's own idea. I told her about the fever and the 3 days and the silence after. I told her about my wolf going quiet and staying that way. I told her more than I had told anyone, including Joran, because Joran loved me and was therefore being careful with me, and Saren did not yet love me. At that point I did not know what she was doing, and her attention was therefore simply true, without cushioning, and the truth of it made it easier to speak. When I stopped, she was quiet for a while. "I'm sorry," she said, "about Myra." "Thank you." "And your wolf," she said carefully, "is he still quiet?" I looked at her. "Less," I said, "since the night in the courtyard." She held very still. "Since you walked out of the door without a cloak," I said. She said nothing. The snow fell outside, covering the tracks. "I'm not asking you to make sense of that," I said. "I'm just telling you what's true, because you knew about my wife and that seemed honest. It's only fair." She was looking at me with the gray eyes, and I saw in them something that was not accountancy, something that was its own kind of quiet, its own kind of careful. "My mother would have something to say about this," she said at last. "What would she say?" "Probably," Saren said slowly, "something about how you can't plan the road. You can pack well and you can walk carefully and you can know the map, but you cannot plan what you find on it." A pause. She would probably also say something about how it's cold and I should come in from the window. Something happened in my chest that was new, or not new but long absent, which amounts in the end to the same thing. I almost laughed. Not the public laugh, not the king's measured acknowledgement of a joke, but the real one, the one that starts somewhere lower than the chest and arrives without asking. "Come inside," I said. "I'll have something warm sent to the library if you want." "I want," she said, and she moved away from the window and we walked down the passage together, not quite in the arrangement of two people who are just walking. And I did not examine that too closely, but I was aware of my wolf settling, not rising, not surging, settling, the way a fire settles when you finally add the wood it needed. On the 6th day, I called Master Edwin to my study. He arrived expecting something, I think, because the word had gotten around Greyhold in the way that words always do, and he was the kind of man who tracks words. He was 62, senior healer of Greyhold for 11 years, a competent man in most respects, and a precise coward in the specific respect that had mattered 5 nights ago. I kept it short. I told him that in a crisis, when the healers he led refused to go into the cold, a visiting healer with no obligation to this pack, no standing under his counsel, no protection from his authority, had gone out alone and saved 2 wolves and effectively managed the triage of 3 wounded men through the night. I told him I wanted him to understand what his refusal had cost, not in lives, this time because the lives had been saved, but in the category of things that cannot be quantified, like trust and standing, and what it means to have people willing to work in the cold when the wind is wrong. I told him I was not removing him. I was asking him to examine the gap between what he had justified to himself and what had actually been required, and to bring me a plan within the month for how his healers would respond differently in the future. He said, with the stiffness of a man who has been fair to middling at his position for 11 years and is not accustomed to this kind of reckoning, "With respect, my lord, the woman is a Karath." "Yes," I said, "she is." "The Karath name will be restored within the fortnight, once the formal review is complete. I'd strongly encourage you to understand what that means before the month is out." He left. Joran, who had been standing by the door in the way he did when he was expecting a conversation to require a witness, looked at me when Edwin was gone. "Fortnight," he said. "The review is straightforward," I said. "The grounds for the original stripping were invalidated 6 years later and the correction was never made. It's a clerical correction with authority behind it." Joran was quiet for a moment, and the healer herself. I looked at him. "I'm not asking in the way that needs a denial," Joran said. "I'm asking because Calder has opinions, and several of the men have opinions, and Osric has opinions, and I would like to know what the position actually is before I have to manage the opinions." "The position," I said, "is that she saved Bren and Calla and worked through the night without being asked when our own healers wouldn't. The position is that her family's name was taken unjustly and is being returned. The rest is—" I stopped. "The rest," Joran said carefully. "The rest is between me and my wolf," I said. "When there's something to tell you, I'll tell you." He accepted that with the grace of a man who has been waiting 3 years for his king to return from somewhere and has learned to be patient about it. On the 7th day, she told me she should go. We were in the stable with Bren, who had been standing for 2 hours that morning without assistance and was very pleased with himself about it. Calla was beside him, as she had been since they'd been put together on the 4th day. Saren had her hand on Bren's neck, checking something I couldn't identify from where I stood, and she said it without looking up. "I should leave tomorrow, I think. Bren is past the critical point. Pell's wound is clean. I've left detailed notes with your younger healer. The girl, Marin, she's very good. You should give her more responsibility, and she can manage what remains." "I know you should," I said. She looked up. "I've been thinking about that," I said, "about what you should do and what I want to ask you. They're different things, and I'm aware of the difference." She straightened. Bren turned his head toward her as if mildly offended she had stopped paying attention to him. She put a hand on his nose without looking at him, which made him settle immediately, the wolf responding to her attention even when it was peripheral. "Ask me," she said. I had thought about how to do this. I had thought about the version that was formal, the kind with witnesses and the language of arrangements, and the version that was personal, and I had decided the personal version was the true one, and I had never found it useful to present the false version when the true one was available. "Stay," I said, "not as a traveling healer waiting out the weather. Stay because this is a pack and a kingdom, and there is significant work to be done in the healer's wing, and because you are better at this than anyone I have, and I would be a poor king to let that walk out the gate to the road. And stay because my wolf has been quiet for 3 years and has not been quiet since the night you walked out into the snow, and I am a king who is also a wolf, and I have learned in 3 very long years that those two things cannot be separated without cost." I stopped. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today about the second part. I'm aware that the second part is significant. I'm asking you to stay and to let the rest be what it is, and we will see what it becomes." Saren looked at me for a long time. Her hand was still on Bren's nose. The stable was warm, we had made sure of that, and outside the 7th day morning was clear and cold, and the snow from the previous day had frozen clean. "You said you would tell me if there were grounds," she said. "In the records, you said you would tell me if you found grounds and not simply restore the name for other reasons." "The grounds are there," I said, "clearly and beyond dispute. The condemnation of the man she treated was set aside 6 years ago, documented and not acted on. The Karath name should have been restored then. It wasn't. That's a clerical failure with authority behind it, and I am the authority, and I'm correcting it." "And the second reason," she said, "the one about your wolf, that's separate." "Entirely separate," I said. "I would return your family's name regardless of everything else. I would ask you to stay and take charge of this hall's healing regardless of everything else. I'm not—" I stopped again. "I'm not a man who knows how to be comfortable at confusion, so I will simply say it. Those things are true on their own, and so is the other. And I would rather tell you all of it than pretend one part doesn't exist, because you have been honest with me and you deserve the same." She was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then she looked down at Bren, who was looking at her with the particular attention of a wolf who has decided someone belongs in his orbit and is making this known. "He's very clear about things, isn't he?" she said. "He's always been direct, yes." "And Calla," she looked at Calla, who had come to stand beside Bren and was watching her with the same quality of attention. "Both of them." "Yes." "And you," she said. She was looking at me now. "You're the least direct of the three, and you're still fairly direct." "I'm trying," I said. She breathed in slowly and out. I watched her decide. "I'll stay," she said, "for the reasons about the work which are real, and—" she paused. "And I'll stay for the other reasons which are also real, and we will see what it becomes." I said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said, and I had learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that the things that are already true do not need to be announced. She turned back to Bren. "He needs another week before he runs," she said. "I mean it. Don't let Calder take him out." "Calder answers to me," I said. "Make sure he knows that applies to the wolves too." "I will tell him directly." "Good." She moved to Calla, checked the wound there, nodded with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose work has held. "Your younger healer, Marin. I'll give her more responsibility." "Starting when?" "Starting today," I said, "if you'll help me think through what." She looked at me and something happened in her face that was small and privately pleased, and probably not meant for me to see, which meant I made certain I did not make anything of it. "I can do that," she said. The formal restoration of the Karath name took 12 days, because I insisted on the full record being corrected, not just the name but the archived account, the notation that the original condemnation had been invalid, and a new entry that made clear the correction should have been made 6 years after the stripping and had not been. I did not want a quiet administrative fix. I wanted a clear one. Saren read it when it was done, all of it, sitting in my study with the lamp lit and the file open, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said her mother's name once softly to no one in particular, and I sat in the other chair and said nothing, which was the correct thing. When she looked up, she was composed, which did not mean she was not moved. "Thank you," she said. It was simple, and it was true. "I should have done it before," I said. "I've said that." "You've done it now," she said. "That counts." I brought the record to the great hall on a winter morning when the fire was lit and the pack was assembled. Not a ceremony exactly, but a reading, which I do from time to time when there are matters the pack should hear plainly rather than learn through rumor. I read the correction. I said the Karath name, and I said that it was restored, and I said why. And I said that the healer Saren of the house Karath had served this pack through a crisis night when our own healers would not, and that her standing in Greyhold was to be understood accordingly. Master Edwin was in the hall. He was standing in the third row, as he always did, with the dignity of a man maintaining his position by force of habit. When I finished reading, and the hall had taken in what had been said, and Calder had begun the response that rippled through the men because Calder always began these things, a kind of sustained acknowledgement, not quite a cheer, the particular sound a pack makes when it is witnessing something that is right, Edwin bowed. He bowed to Saren. It was not a dramatic bow. He was not a dramatic man, and I do not think he had done a great deal of soul-searching in the 12 days. I do not want to give him more credit than he earned. But it was a real bow, the kind that recognizes something it had previously declined to recognize, and she received it with a nod that was neither gracious nor cold, simply present. And then she looked at me, and only at me, and what she was looking for was something she had apparently found, because she looked back at the hall with the expression I had now seen enough times to know. The quiet of something accounted for. There is a moment I have not described yet, because it belongs somewhere other than the chronology. It happened between the 7th day and the 12th, on an evening when Saren was in the library, and I came to find her and found her asleep in the chair by the window, the file on the Karath records open in her lap. She had been reading it, because she read everything related to it as I brought sections to her, and at some point she had stopped. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I came in and I lifted the file carefully from her lap, which woke her in the way a healer always wakes, immediately and without confusion. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting up. "I was reading." "I know," I said. "Stay there." I set the file aside on the table. "It's late." She settled back, not quite asleep, looking at me in the firelight with the slow attention of someone who is too tired to manage anything but the truth. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The night in the courtyard," she said. "When you said your wolf had been quiet, how quiet?" I sat down in the other chair. 3 years, I said. From the 43rd day after Myra died. I know the day exactly because I was counting, at first, the way you count things when you are waiting for them to return. And then he didn't return and I stopped counting, but I remembered. "And now," she said. I looked at her. "Present," I said. "Since the night in the snow, quiet in a different way, not the absence quiet, the other kind." She took that in. Then she held out her hand, not in the way of someone asking for something, but in the way of someone offering, an open palm, set on the arm of the chair between us. I put my hand over hers. The mate mark rose slowly, the way it is said to rise in the old accounts that I had read as a young man and half dismissed as ceremony and metaphor. A warmth first, then a light, the pale silver of the moon through snow, tracing the line of the bond along the inside of her wrist, and then the back of my hand, and then connecting, joining, becoming one mark in 2 places at once. We looked at it. "Oh," said Saren. "Yes," I said. She looked at me. "I thought it might," she said. "I wasn't sure, I didn't want to say it in case I was wrong." "I thought it might too," I said. "I also didn't want to say it." We're both very careful people, she said. Yes. She looked at the mark again, and then she turned her hand under mine so that her fingers could close around it, and she held on with the same quality she held everything. The grip that is not tight but is entirely secure, that says I have assessed this and I am not letting go. I held on too. Outside the library window, the Vareth Mountains were silver under a clear sky, and somewhere in the inner stable Bren and Calla were warm and healing and together. And somewhere in the rest of Greyhold, my pack was living the quiet life of an evening after a crisis well survived. And I was sitting in my library with my hand in the hand of a woman who had walked into the snow without a cloak because someone needed help, and my wolf, who had been silent for 3 years and 4 months and 26 days, was finally simply home. I will tell you how it ended, which is to say how it began. In the spring, when the high passes opened and the roads were clear, Saren could have gone. The reason for staying, the crisis, the restoration, the week that had turned into months, was technically complete. She was the head of Greyhold's healer's wing by then, which had been Marin's suggestion before mine, and which had been welcomed by the healers who had not refused to go into the snow and found less welcome with the one who had. She had reorganized the East Wing stores and trained 3 of the younger healers in the method she called layered attention, which meant you track the whole patient at once rather than only the wound. And she had begun a record system that would have made a difference on the night of the ambush if it had existed then. She could have gone, and she did not go, and I want to be honest that I did not know, day to day, whether she would, because she was a woman who had been on the road for 3 years, and the road had given her something she had built herself, and I did not assume that what I was offering was simply better. What I was offering was this. I told her on the morning the passes opened that I would not ask her to stay again. I had asked twice. I had meant what I said both times. If she needed to go, or wanted to go, or found that what we had built together through the winter was not enough for the permanent choice, I would understand it, and I would see that she had everything she needed for the road, and I would spend a considerable portion of the rest of my life regretting it, but I would understand it. She listened to this. Then she said, "You're asking me again, you know that." I considered this. I suppose I am. "It's all right," she said. "The road will always be there, you're harder to find." She stayed. In the summer I brought her before my council and before my pack, not to ask their blessing. I was a king, and she was my fated mate, and the mate bond is not a thing that requires council approval. But because I wanted them to know, plainly and publicly, the same way I wanted everything that mattered to be known plainly and publicly, that she was mine and I was hers, which are not 2 different statements but one. I told them who she was. I told them what she had done on the night that the storm came in and the patrol came back broken and every other healer stayed inside. I told them about her mother, and the 12 years, and the correction I had made, and what it had cost her to carry a disgraced name through 3 years on the road without bitterness and without stopping her work. I told them what she was to me, which I could say plainly now, which I found I could say with the clarity I had once reserved for things like logistics and strategy and the management of succession challenges, except that this was nothing like those things, which was the point. The pack heard it. Calder, who had known before I said anything because Calder always knew, started the response that rippled through the hall. Master Edwin in the 3rd row bowed again, this time with less stiffness. Marin in the front row because she was now in the first tier of the healer's wing, and that was where they stood, watched Saren with an expression I recognized, because it was one I had seen before on Joran, on Calder, on the men who had come back broken from the ambush and watched her work through the night without stopping. The expression of someone who has revised entirely upward what they thought a person was capable of, and is glad. Saren looked at none of them. She looked at me, in the particular way she had of looking at me that I had learned over the months and that I did not think she was aware she did, which was like checking a wound, not cold, but precise, making sure that the thing is holding, that it is well, that the work is doing what the work is supposed to do. It was holding, it was well. I took her hand, the one with the mark, and held it in mine, and the hall around us was warm and full of the sound of a pack that has come through a hard season, and is, for this moment, at ease. Myra, I thought, would have had opinions about this. She would have been loud about it, and she would have been right about most of it, because she was usually right, and the thought of that did not hurt the way it had hurt for 3 years. It had become instead what it should be, which is a thing I carried that did not drag me down, but weighted me toward the ground in the way of something you carry because it belongs to you. Saren squeezed my hand. I looked at her. She was still checking, still accounting, still the woman who had walked into the snow without being asked because someone needed help, and she was there. "You're all right," she said quietly under the sound of the hall. "Yes," I said, "for the first time in a while, yes." She nodded once with the satisfaction of a wound that is held. And that is where the story is, which is to say it is not finished. None of the stories that matter are finished. They simply have a place where you can set them down and say, here it became what it was supposed to be. This is that place. The snow has come and gone, and Bren and Kala run the high passes again, and Marin has started training the two newest healers in the method, and the road outside Greyhold's eastern gate is clear, and Saren does not need it. She is already home,